why is this taking so long? For the premeditated murder of your mother and unborn sibling, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 16-year-old Tyler Brennan strangled his pregnant mother, Carol Brennan, with an extension cord in their suburban Connecticut home, while his younger siblings slept upstairs, staging the scene to look like a home invasion. Carol, 7 months pregnant with twin girls the family had named Hope and Grace, was discovered by her husband in their basement the following morning, her body positioned in a way that suggested struggle with an intruder. What began as what appeared to be a tragic break-in quickly unraveled into something far more sinister when investigators discovered inconsistencies in Tyler's account, security footage contradicting his timeline, and digital evidence revealing months of planning. Before we continue with this devastating case, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from as we explore this disturbing case of familial violence and the dark psychology of adolescent rage. The Brennan family lived in the affluent suburb of Westfield, Connecticut, in a colonial-style home on a tree-lined street where neighbors knew each other by name and children played freely in front yards. Michael Brennan, a successful commercial real estate attorney, and Carol Brennan, a pediatric nurse at Yale New Haven Hospital, had built what appeared from the outside to be an enviable life. Their home, purchased 12 years earlier when Tyler was just 4 years old, featured 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, and a backyard with a swing set that had hosted countless neighborhood gatherings. The family attended St. Matthew's Catholic Church regularly, volunteered at community food drives, and maintained the kind of Norman Rockwell existence that made the events of March 18, 2023, all the more incomprehensible to those who thought they knew them. Carol Brennan was more than the sum of her tragic end. At 42 years old, she represented the kind of healthcare professional whose dedication extended far beyond her official duties. Colleagues at Yale New Haven Hospital described her as the nurse who stayed late to comfort frightened children, who remembered the names and medical histories of repeat patients, who advocated fiercely for families navigating the complexities of pediatric care. Her specialty was neonatal intensive care, working with premature infants and their terrified parents during the most vulnerable moments of new life. Friends noted the profound irony that someone so dedicated to protecting the most fragile children would die alongside her own unborn daughters. The pregnancy with Hope and Grace had come as a surprise to Carol and Michael, both believing their family complete with Tyler and their 2 younger children, 11-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Lucas. Medical records would reveal that Carol had experienced complications early in the pregnancy, requiring bed rest during her first trimester and careful monitoring throughout. Despite these challenges, she had embraced the unexpected additions with characteristic warmth, viewing the twins as a blessing rather than a disruption. Her hospital colleagues remembered her excitement as she discussed plans for the nursery, the logistical challenges of twins, and her intention to take extended maternity leave to bond with her daughters before returning to work. Behind Carol's professional accomplishments and the family's outward appearance of stability lay undercurrents of tension that most neighbors and casual acquaintances never perceived. Tyler Brennan, the eldest child and only son, had been struggling academically and socially for nearly 2 years before his mother's murder. Once an honor roll student and varsity soccer player, his grades had declined sharply during his sophomore year of high school. Teachers reported increasing absences, incomplete assignments, and a withdrawn demeanor that contrasted sharply with the outgoing personality he had displayed in earlier years. The school guidance counselor had met with Carol and Michael twice during the fall semester, recommending evaluation for depression and possible academic intervention programs. What would later emerge through investigation was that Tyler's struggles stemmed from multiple intersecting pressures. He had been cut from the varsity soccer team at the beginning of his junior year, a devastating blow for a teenager who had built his identity around athletic achievement. His social circle had fractured following a falling out with his longtime friend group over an incident at a party that Tyler refused to discuss with his parents. Most significantly, he had become consumed with online gaming, spending up to 12 hours daily in his bedroom, playing massively multiplayer games, and interacting with online communities that his parents knew little about. This digital immersion had created a parallel existence where Tyler felt competent and respected, a sharp contrast to his increasingly difficult reality. The announcement of Carol's pregnancy in October 2022 had occurred during this period of Tyler's adolescent crisis. Family members would later recall that Tyler's reaction to the news had been muted, described by his aunt as polite but distant. Where his younger siblings, Emma and Lucas, had responded with age-appropriate excitement about becoming big siblings again, Tyler had retreated further into his room and his online world. Carol's journal, discovered after her death, contained several entries expressing concern about Tyler's withdrawal and her unsuccessful attempts to engage him in preparations for the twins' arrival. One entry, dated January 14, 2023, just 2 months before Carol's murder, read, "Tyler barely acknowledged me when I asked if he wanted to help paint the nursery this weekend. He said he had plans online, with his gaming friends. Michael thinks I'm overreacting, that this is normal teenage behavior, but something feels different. He used to talk to me about everything. Now it's like there's a wall between us that I don't know how to breach. I worry that the twins are making him feel pushed aside, even though we've tried to include him in every step." Another entry from February 3rd revealed Carol's growing awareness that something more serious might be developing. Found disturbing search history on Tyler's computer when I was looking for tax documents he'd scanned for us. Searches about feeling invisible in your own family, about parents who favor younger children, about sibling rivalry taken to extremes. I tried to talk to him about it, told him we could see a counselor together, but he shut down completely. Said I was invading his privacy and that I wouldn't understand. Michael thinks we should give him space, that pressing too hard will make things worse. But my nurse instincts are screaming that something is very wrong. This final entry, written less than 6 weeks before her murder, demonstrated that Carol had perceived danger without fully grasping its immediacy or nature. The search history she had discovered would later become crucial evidence in establishing Tyler's state of mind in the weeks leading up to March 18th, revealing an adolescent whose resentment had been building incrementally, transforming from normal teenage angst into something darker and more obsessive. The physical layout of the Brennan home would play a crucial role in both the crime and the subsequent investigation. The colonial-style house featured a main floor with living room, kitchen, and dining area, a second floor with 4 bedrooms, and a finished basement that Michael had converted into a combination home office and recreation room. The basement featured a small office area where Michael worked on weekends, a sectional sofa and television for family movie nights, and storage areas containing holiday decorations, old furniture, and the accumulated detritus of family life. Access to the basement came through a door off the kitchen, with stairs descending into a carpeted space that ran the full length of the house. On the evening of March the 17th, 2023, the Brennan family had followed what appeared to be a typical Friday routine. Michael had returned from work around 6:30 p.m. Carol had prepared dinner despite feeling tired from a long shift at the hospital, and the children had eaten together at the kitchen table, a family practice that Carol had insisted upon maintaining despite increasingly busy schedules. Emma and Lucas had homework to complete afterward, while Tyler, as had become his pattern, retreated immediately to his room after dinner, claiming he had an online raid scheduled with his gaming guild. According to statements given by Michael and the younger children, Carol had spent the evening doing laundry, preparing lesson materials for a prenatal class she was teaching at the hospital, and organizing baby clothes that friends and family had already begun gifting for Hope and Grace. Around 9:30 p.m., she had told Michael she was going to the basement to retrieve storage bins containing baby items from Tyler's infancy that she wanted to wash and organize for the twins. Michael, absorbed in reviewing contracts for an upcoming real estate closing, had acknowledged her comment with a distracted nod, not registering that it would be the last time he would speak to his wife while she was alive. Security camera footage from the Brennans' front doorbell camera and from a neighbor's driveway camera across the street would later establish a timeline that contradicted Tyler's initial statements to police. The footage showed no vehicles approaching the Brennan home between 9 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., no individuals on foot in the vicinity, and no signs of forced entry or unusual activity. The Brennans' security system, which armed the front and back doors while leaving interior motion sensors deactivated when family members were home, showed no breaches during the relevant time period. This absence of evidence supporting an external intruder would become one of the first indicators to investigators that the crime scene had been staged. What actually occurred in the Brennan basement between approximately 9:45 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. on March 17th would only be fully understood after Tyler's eventual confession. But forensic evidence would tell much of the story even before that admission. Carol had descended the basement stairs carrying an empty laundry basket, intending to collect baby clothes from storage bins in the far corner of the basement. At some point during the next 30 minutes, Tyler had followed his mother downstairs, having retrieved an orange extension cord from the garage, where it had been coiled on a shelf among other household tools and equipment. The medical examiner would later determine that Carol had been attacked from behind while kneeling in front of an open storage bin, her attention focused on sorting through infant clothing. The extension cord had been looped around her neck and pulled tight with enough force to cut off blood flow to her brain within seconds, causing rapid unconsciousness. Unlike strangulation by hand, which often leaves the victim time to struggle and fight. The ligature strangulation Carol experienced would have rendered her unable to call for help or effectively resist. The entire attack, based on forensic analysis, likely lasted less than 3 minutes from initial assault to death. After Carol stopped moving, Tyler had engaged in what investigators would later describe as calculated staging designed to suggest a home invasion. He had rifled through his mother's purse, removing her wallet and scattering its contents across the basement floor. He had overturned furniture, knocked items from shelves, and created the appearance of a struggle far more extensive than what had actually occurred. Most tellingly, he had removed the extension cord from around his mother's neck and hidden it in his bedroom closet, replacing it with a decorative scarf from a basement storage box. Positioning this substitute ligature loosely around her neck in a way that would not withstand close forensic examination, but might deceive first responders viewing the scene. Tyler had then returned upstairs to his bedroom, where he resumed his online gaming session with players located across different time zones, creating what he believed would be an alibi. Gaming logs and voice chat recordings would later show that Tyler had been offline between 9:43 p.m. and 10:17 p.m., a 34-minute absence that aligned precisely with the window when Carol's murder occurred. When asked by other players about his absence, Tyler had claimed internet connectivity issues, a common enough occurrence that no one questioned the explanation. The discovery of Carol's body came the following morning, Saturday, March 18th, when Michael descended to the basement around 7:30 a.m. looking for his wife. Carol had not come to bed the previous night, and Michael, assuming she had fallen asleep on the basement couch while watching television, a habit she had developed during her pregnancy when back pain made sleep difficult, had not become concerned until morning. What he found instead was a scene of apparent violence that would shatter his understanding of his family and his life. Michael's 911 call, placed at 7:34 a.m., captured the raw panic of discovering a spouse's body. "My wife, she's not breathing. There's blood. Someone was in our house. Please send help immediately." The dispatcher kept Michael on the line while simultaneously dispatching emergency services, instructing him not to disturb the scene while also guiding him through checking for vital signs. Michael's statements on the call, later analyzed for authenticity and consistency, reflected genuine shock and horror, his voice breaking as he confirmed that Carol was cold to the touch and clearly deceased. Westfield Police Department officers Jennifer Martinez and David Chen arrived at the Brennan residence within 6 minutes of the 911 call, finding Michael on the front lawn, visibly distraught and incoherent. Officer Martinez immediately secured the scene while Officer Chen attempted to gather preliminary information from Michael, whose account emphasized that the house had been locked when he woke, that nothing appeared disturbed upstairs, and that he could not imagine who would target his family. The officers' initial assessment, documented in their incident report, noted the apparently forced entry into the basement through a window, the ransacked appearance of the space, and the victim's body positioned in a way suggesting she had been attacked while going through storage boxes. Detective Sarah Williams of the Westfield Police Department's Criminal Investigations Division arrived at the scene at 8:15 a.m., by which time the house had been fully secured, and the 3 Brennan children had been removed to a neighbor's home. shielded from the investigation unfolding in their house. Williams, a 15-year veteran with extensive training in homicide investigation, began her examination with the systematic approach that would ultimately unravel Tyler's staged crime scene. Her initial walkthrough of the basement immediately raised questions that would guide the investigation's direction. The basement window that appeared to have been the intruder's entry point showed inconsistencies that troubled Detective Williams. While the window was indeed open and the screen removed, there was no dirt or debris on the windowsill or the floor below it, despite the fact that the window well outside was filled with damp soil and dead leaves from winter. No footprints or shoe impressions marked the carpet near the window, and the displaced items around the window appeared to have been arranged rather than scattered by someone climbing through. Most tellingly, the window opened outward, making it physically difficult for someone to enter from outside, yet the screen had been removed and placed carefully on the ground outside, rather than damaged or pushed inward, as would be expected from forced entry. Detective Williams also noted peculiarities in the positioning of Carol's body and the scene around it. The decorative scarf around Carol's neck was loosely positioned, not tight enough to have caused the petechial hemorrhaging visible in her eyes and face, classic signs of strangulation. The overturned furniture and scattered items appeared staged, lacking the chaotic randomness of an actual struggle. Carol's purse had been emptied, yet her diamond wedding ring remained on her finger, and expensive electronics in the basement, including a large flat-screen television and Michael's laptop computer, remained untouched. These observations led Williams to an early hypothesis that the crime scene had been manipulated to mislead investigators. As crime scene technicians photographed and processed the basement, Williams conducted preliminary interviews with family members, beginning with Michael Brennan. His account of the previous evening established the timeline and family routine, noting that he had last seen Carol around 9:30 p.m. when she mentioned going to the basement. When asked about each family member's whereabouts during the evening, Michael stated that Tyler had been in his room gaming, Emma had been doing homework in her room, and Lucas had gone to bed around 8:30 p.m. None of the children, according to Michael, had come downstairs after dinner except to use the bathroom or get drinks from the kitchen. Williams then spoke with Tyler separately, a conversation that would later be scrutinized for signs of deception. The 16-year-old presented as shocked and grief-stricken, his responses punctuated by tears and pauses. When asked about his activities the previous evening, Tyler stated he had been in his room from approximately 7 p.m. until his father woke him with the terrible news that morning. He claimed to have been gaming online continuously, speaking with friends through his headset, and had heard nothing unusual from the basement. When asked if he had left his room at any point, Tyler stated he had gone to the bathroom twice and gotten a glass of water from the kitchen around 10 p.m., but had not gone near the basement stairs. This initial interview, conducted in the immediate aftermath of discovering Carol's body and before Tyler was considered a suspect, revealed several verbal tells that would gain significance as the investigation progressed. Tyler's narrative contained excessive detail about his gaming activities, a common feature of fabricated alibis where the subject overcompensates by providing more information than requested. He volunteered information about the specific game he had been playing, the names of other players, and the objectives of their session, creating what Williams noted in her report as an alibis that feels prepared rather than recalled. Most significant was Tyler's reaction when Williams mentioned the basement window, asking if he had heard any sounds of it being opened during the evening. Tyler had responded with immediate denial before the full question was completed, stating, "I didn't hear the window. I didn't hear anything." This self-correction, caught by Williams, suggested knowledge of the staged entry point before it had been revealed to him, a classic indicator of guilty knowledge. Williams made note of this slip but continued the interview without revealing her suspicion, following standard protocol of allowing a potential suspect to believe their story had been accepted. The medical examiner's preliminary findings, available by mid-afternoon on March 18th, confirmed Detective Williams's suspicions that the crime scene had been staged. Dr. Patricia Huang, the Connecticut State Medical Examiner, determined that Carol Brennan had died from ligature strangulation, but that the decorative scarf found around her neck was not the murder weapon. The pattern of the ligature marks on Carol's neck showed a narrow, deep furrow consistent with something like a cord or rope, not the wider, softer pattern that would have been created by the silk scarf. Additionally, fibers embedded in the ligature marks did not match the scarf, but were instead consistent with plastic or rubber coating, such as would be found on an electrical cord. Dr. Huang's report also noted the absence of defensive wounds on Carol's hands and arms, suggesting she had been taken by surprise and rendered unconscious too quickly to fight back effectively. The positioning of her body, while appearing at first glance to indicate a struggle, actually showed that she had been moved post-mortem, with lividity patterns inconsistent with the position in which she was found. These findings, combined with the lack of evidence supporting forced entry, led Williams to shift her investigation from searching for an external perpetrator to examining the possibility that someone within the household had staged a home invasion to cover their crime. While forensic teams continued processing the basement, Williams obtained a warrant to search the rest of the Brennan home, focusing particularly on Tyler's bedroom. The search, conducted on the evening of March 18th, revealed several items of immediate interest. Hidden in Tyler's closet, beneath a pile of dirty laundry, investigators discovered the orange extension cord that would prove to be the actual murder weapon. Preliminary testing showed the presence of what appeared to be blood on the cord's surface, and the cord's dimensions matched the ligature marks on Carol's neck. The discovery of this cord, deliberately hidden rather than left at the scene or disposed of outside the home, became a crucial piece of evidence suggesting the perpetrator had remained in the house after the murder. Tyler's laptop computer, seized as part of the search, would yield even more damaging evidence once forensic analysts examined its contents. The browser history, which Tyler had attempted to delete but which was recoverable through forensic software, revealed disturbing searches in the months leading up to Carol's murder. In December 2022, Tyler had searched for how to stage a home invasion, do police believe staged crime scenes, and how long does strangulation take. In February 2023, the searches became more specific. Ligature strangulation versus manual strangulation, how to avoid leaving DNA evidence, and do security cameras record inside houses? Most damning were searches conducted on the afternoon of March the 17th, just hours before Carol's murder. Where do police look first in a murder investigation? Can deleted Internet history be recovered? And time of death determination methods. These searches, time-stamped and preserved in the computer's forensic image, established not only premeditation but a calculated attempt to understand investigative procedures and avoid detection. The prosecution would later argue that these searches demonstrated a level of planning incompatible with any claim of impulsive action or diminished capacity due to adolescent brain development. Tyler's online gaming records, subpoenaed from the game company's servers, revealed the 34-minute gap in his session on the evening of March the 17th, directly contradicting his claim to have been gaming continuously from 7 p.m. until morning. Voice chat recordings, archived by the gaming platform, captured Tyler's interaction with other players, showing normal conversation before the gap and a noticeably different demeanor afterward. Gaming psychology experts who later reviewed these recordings noted that Tyler's post-murder communications showed increased stress in vocal patterns, more frequent mistakes in gameplay, and unusual silence during periods when active communication would normally occur. As physical and digital evidence accumulated, Detective Williams made the decision to conduct a formal interview with Tyler at the police station, this time with his father present, and with Tyler's rights clearly articulated. The interview, conducted on March 20th, 2 days after Carol's murder, began with Williams explaining that new evidence had emerged requiring clarification of Tyler's previous statements. Michael Brennan, still processing his wife's death and unaware of the evidence implicating his son, sat beside Tyler, offering paternal support that would become heartbreaking in retrospect once the truth emerged. Williams began by asking Tyler to walk through his evening again, this time with more specific focus on timing. Tyler repeated his earlier account, stating he had been gaming continuously in his room from dinner until morning. When Williams asked about the gap in his gaming records, Tyler initially appeared confused, then suggested there might have been internet connectivity issues. Williams then revealed that the gaming company's server logs showed he had manually logged out at 9:43 p.m. and logged back in at 10:17 p.m., timestamps that contradicted any explanation of connectivity problems. Tyler's demeanor shifted noticeably at this revelation, his composed grief giving way to visible anxiety. He modified his story, acknowledging that he had taken a break from gaming but claiming he had remained in his room, perhaps doing homework or watching videos on his phone. When Williams asked him to be more specific, Tyler became evasive, stating he couldn't remember exactly what he had done during that time. This evasiveness, captured on the interview room's recording equipment, would later be presented to the jury as evidence of consciousness of guilt. The detective then introduced the extension cord, sealed in an evidence bag, asking Tyler if he recognized it. Tyler's reaction, described in Williams's report as immediate physical distress, included visible trembling, rapid breathing, and inability to maintain eye contact. When asked directly if he had any idea why this cord, which matched extension cords stored in the family's garage, would be hidden in his closet with what appeared to be his mother's blood on it, Tyler requested to stop the interview. Michael, beginning to comprehend the direction of the questioning, appeared stunned, asking the detective if she was suggesting his son had something to do with Carol's death. Williams suspended the interview and recommended that Michael obtain legal representation for Tyler immediately. Over the next 24 hours, as Michael processed the impossible reality that his son was the primary suspect in his wife's murder, Tyler remained in juvenile detention, where he had been placed on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. The detention facility's overnight logs would note that Tyler displayed minimal emotional response to his situation, sleeping through most of his first night and declining to discuss the case with the facility's counselor. This flat affect, so markedly different from the grief-stricken demeanor he had displayed initially, supported the prosecution's later argument that Tyler's emotional presentations had been performative rather than genuine. The forensic analysis of the extension cord provided the scientific link that would prove insurmountable for the defense. DNA testing confirmed that blood on the cord belonged to Carol Brennan, and the pattern of blood distribution matched ligature strangulation. The cord's dimensions corresponded exactly to the width of the furrow on Carol's neck, and microscopic examination revealed textile fibers caught in the cord's plastic coating that matched the sweater Carol had been wearing at the time of her death. The cord also bore Tyler's fingerprints in multiple locations, including the areas that would have been gripped during strangulation. On March 23rd, 5 days after Carol's murder, Tyler Brennan was formally charged with first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. The decision to charge him as an adult, despite being 16 at the time of the crime, came after consultation between the Westfield Police Department, the Connecticut State's Attorney's Office, and juvenile justice authorities. Connecticut law permitted such discretionary transfer for defendants 14 and older charged with capital offenses, and the premeditated nature of the crime, combined with the attempted cover-up, led prosecutors to determine that adult prosecution was appropriate. The arraignment, held in Middlesex Superior Court, drew significant media attention as one of the first high-profile juvenile cases in Connecticut to involve matricide. Tyler, appearing in shackles and a detention center jumpsuit, entered a plea of not guilty through his court-appointed attorney, Robert Martinez. Martinez, a veteran public defender specializing in juvenile cases, immediately signaled his intention to challenge the adult prosecution designation, arguing that Tyler's age and developmental stage required consideration in a juvenile framework. Judge Ellen Morrison set bail at $2 million, effectively ensuring Tyler would remain detained through trial, and scheduled a probable cause hearing for the following month. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court as part of Tyler's competency assessment revealed a complex portrait of adolescent dysfunction that would become central to the defense's strategy. Dr. Marcus Chen, a forensic psychologist specializing in juvenile offenders, spent 15 hours interviewing Tyler over multiple sessions, administering standardized psychological tests, and reviewing his educational, medical, and social history. The resulting report, submitted to the court in April 2023, diagnosed Tyler with major depressive disorder, social anxiety disorder, and what Dr. Chen termed pathological attachment disruption, related to his mother's pregnancy. According to Dr. Chen's evaluation, Tyler had experienced the pregnancy announcement and the family's subsequent focus on preparing for twins as a fundamental rejection, triggering abandonment, fears disproportionate to the actual circumstances. This distorted perception, combined with pre-existing depression and social isolation, had created what the psychologists described as a catastrophic misinterpretation of family dynamics, where normal parental excitement about a pregnancy was perceived as existential threat to his place in the family. The evaluation noted, however, that Tyler's cognitive functioning remained intact, that he understood the difference between right and wrong, and that his planning and cover-up demonstrated capacity for complex reasoning and consequence prediction. This psychological profile presented both opportunities and challenges for the defense. While it provided context for Tyler's state of mind and supported arguments about diminished capacity due to mental illness, it also confirmed that he had possessed the cognitive ability to plan, execute, and attempt to conceal his crime. The prosecution would later argue that the evaluation actually supported their case, showing Tyler as someone who understood his actions were wrong and who took deliberate steps to avoid responsibility, hallmarks of criminal culpability, regardless of underlying psychological issues. As the case moved toward trial, investigators continued developing their understanding of Tyler's motive beyond the general psychological dynamics Dr. Chen had identified. Interviews with Tyler's younger siblings, conducted with care appropriate to their ages and trauma, revealed family dynamics that had escaped parental notice. Emma, the 11-year-old middle child, described Tyler's increasing isolation and anger in the months before their mother's death, recalling specific incidents where he had made disparaging comments about the twins and about their mother's excitement. One incident Emma recounted proved particularly significant. Approximately 2 weeks before the murder, Tyler had been in the kitchen with Emma when Carol was on the phone with her sister, enthusiastically discussing baby names and nursery plans. According to Emma, Tyler had said under his breath, "She doesn't even remember my name anymore. Everything's about hope and grace." When Emma asked what he meant, Tyler had responded, "You'll understand when they send you away too." This comment, which Emma had not understood at the time and had not thought to mention to her parents, provided prosecutors with evidence that Tyler's resentment had crystallized into a specific belief that the twins' arrival would result in his displacement. Additional evidence of Tyler's deteriorating relationship with his mother came from Carol's text message history, preserved on her phone and submitted as evidence. In the 3 months before her death, Carol had sent Tyler over 100 text messages, attempting to initiate conversations about his well-being, inviting him to participate in family activities, and expressing concern about his withdrawal. Tyler's responses were minimal, often single words or emoji, with long gaps between Carol's attempts and his replies. The last text exchange, occurring on March the 16th, showed Carol writing, "Tyler, I love you so much. I'm worried about you. Please talk to me. Whatever's going on, we can work through it together." Tyler's response, sent 3 hours later, "Nothing's going on. I'm fine. Stop worrying." Carol's final text, sent at 11:47 p.m. on March 16th, less than 24 hours before her murder. "I'll never stop worrying. You're my son, and I love you. That will never change, no matter how many other children we have. You're irreplaceable to me." This message, read aloud during trial, would provide some of the most emotionally wrenching moments of the proceedings, demonstrating Carol's awareness of Tyler's insecurity and her attempts to reassure him, attempts that had tragically failed to prevent the violence that would follow. The state of Connecticut versus Tyler Brennan began on October 2, 2023, in Middlesex Superior Court before Judge Ellen Morrison. The 6-month delay between arrest and trial had been consumed by pretrial motions, psychological evaluations, and the unsuccessful defense attempt to have the case remanded to juvenile court. The jury selection process took 3 days, with both sides carefully vetting potential jurors for their views on juvenile culpability, parental responsibility, and their ability to weigh scientific evidence about adolescent brain development against the brutal facts of the crime. The prosecution team, led by Assistant State's Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a prosecutor known for her meticulous preparation and emotional intelligence, had structured their case around 3 pillars: the physical evidence linking Tyler to the murder weapon, the digital evidence establishing premeditation, and the psychological evidence demonstrating his motive. In her opening statement, Walsh carefully balanced the need to hold Tyler accountable with acknowledgement of the tragedy's impact on all involved, including Tyler himself. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Walsh began, her voice measured and empathetic. "What you are about to hear is the story of a family destroyed from within. Carol Brennan was a devoted mother, a skilled nurse, and a woman who loved her children unconditionally. On March 17, 2023, she was excited to organize baby clothes for the twin daughters she would never meet. Daughters who would die alongside her in their family's basement. She was killed not by a stranger who broke into her home, but by her own son, who she loved, who she was worried about, and who she was desperately trying to reach in the months before her death." Walsh displayed a large photograph of Carol Brennan on the courtroom screen, showing her smiling in her nurse's scrubs at the hospital, a professional portrait that humanized the victim beyond the crime scene photographs that would necessarily be introduced later. "Carol Brennan deserves justice," the prosecutor continued. "Her unborn daughters, Hope and Grace, deserve to have their brief existence acknowledged and their loss recognized. The evidence will show that Tyler Brennan, despite his youth, planned his mother's murder, executed it with calculated precision, and then attempted to deceive investigators by staging a home invasion. The science, the digital evidence, and the physical evidence all point to the same inescapable conclusion." The prosecutor then methodically outlined the evidence the jury would see: the extension cord with Carol's blood and Tyler's fingerprints, the internet search history revealing months of planning, the gaming records showing the precise window when the murder occurred, and the staged crime scene that unraveled under forensic examination. Walsh concluded by addressing what she knew would be the defense's central argument. You will hear testimony about Tyler's age, about his brain development, about his psychological state. These are important considerations, and we do not discount them. But the law requires that we hold people accountable for their actions when those actions demonstrate planning, execution, and understanding of right and wrong. Tyler Brennan's actions that night, and his behavior afterward, show someone who knew exactly what he was doing and who tried desperately to avoid the consequences. Defense attorney Robert Martinez approached his opening statement with the delicate task of acknowledging the tragedy, while reframing Tyler's actions within a context of adolescent crisis and mental illness. Members of the jury, what happened to Carol Brennan was a tragedy of unspeakable proportions, Martinez began. But what you will learn as this trial unfolds is that it was a tragedy born not from evil, but from the collision of mental illness, adolescent brain development, and a profoundly distorted perception of family dynamics. Tyler Brennan is not a monster. He is a 16-year-old child whose brain is, scientifically speaking, years away from full development, particularly in the areas that control impulse, risk assessment, and long-term consequence evaluation. Martinez introduced the jury to the concept of the prefrontal cortex, explaining that the region of the brain responsible for executive function, impulse control, and rational decision-making is not fully mature until the mid-20s. He promised expert testimony from neuroscientists and developmental psychologists who would explain how this biological reality fundamentally changes how we should understand Tyler's actions. The Internet searches the prosecution will show you, the timeline they will establish, even the attempted cover-up afterward. All of these must be understood through the lens of a brain that is physiologically incapable of the kind of mature judgment we expect from adults. The defense attorney then addressed Tyler's mental state more specifically, describing the depression, anxiety, and attachment disruption documented in Dr. Chen's evaluation. Tyler Brennan was drowning, Martinez stated, his voice carrying genuine emotion. He was experiencing a mental health crisis that his parents, despite their love and good intentions, did not fully recognize or understand. He had constructed a narrative in his mind where the arrival of twins meant his removal from the family, a narrative that, while objectively false, felt absolutely real to him in his compromised psychological state. Martinez concluded his opening statement with a direct appeal to the jury's capacity for nuance. What we're asking you to consider is not whether Tyler caused his mother's death. That tragic fact is not in dispute. What we're asking is whether a 16-year-old experiencing severe mental illness and operating with an underdeveloped brain can form the kind of premeditated intent required for first-degree murder, or whether what happened was a catastrophic failure of impulse control by a child in crisis. We believe the evidence, properly understood, will show the latter. The prosecution's case began with the systematic presentation of physical evidence, starting with Detective Sarah Williams' testimony about the staged crime scene. Williams walked the jury through her initial observations at the Brennan home, explaining how her training and experience had immediately raised red flags about the basement window, the positioning of Carol's body, and the inconsistencies between the scene's appearance and the evidence of actual forced entry. Using crime scene photographs projected on courtroom screens, Williams pointed out the absence of dirt on the windowsill, the careful placement of overturned furniture, and the selective nature of the supposed ransacking. In a genuine home invasion where the perpetrator is searching for valuables, Williams explained, we typically see random, chaotic searching drawers completely emptied, items scattered without pattern. Here, the disturbance was superficial. Items were pushed off shelves, but storage boxes in the basement containing actual valuables were untouched. The scene felt staged, like someone's idea of what a break-in should look like rather than what one actually looks like. On cross-examination, Martinez challenged Williams's interpretation, suggesting that her suspicions were based on subjective impressions rather than objective evidence. Detective Williams, isn't it possible that a real intruder simply didn't have time to do a more thorough search? He asked. Williams acknowledged that such a scenario was theoretically possible, but maintained that when considered alongside the other evidence, the lack of physical signs of entry, the security footage showing no activity, and the discovery of the actual murder weapon hidden inside the home, the staged interpretation was the only reasonable conclusion. The medical examiner's testimony provided the jury with a clear understanding of how Carol had died and why the decorative scarf could not have been the murder weapon. Dr. Patricia Huang used anatomical diagrams and carefully edited autopsy photographs to explain the ligature marks on Carol's neck, emphasizing the narrow, deep furrow that could only have been created by something like the extension cord discovered in Tyler's closet. The pattern of injury, Dr. Huang testified, shows that significant force was applied in a pulling motion, constricting the neck and cutting off blood flow to the brain. Loss of consciousness would have occurred within 10 to 15 seconds, with death following within 2 to 3 minutes if pressure was maintained. The medical examiner also addressed the position of Carol's body when discovered, explaining that lividity patterns, the settling of blood in the lowest parts of the body after death, showed she had been moved post-mortem. The lividity present in Ms. Brennan's body was inconsistent with the position in which she was found, Dr. Huang explained. This indicates she was initially in a different position after death and was subsequently moved, likely as part of the staging we've heard described. Perhaps the most technically complex but ultimately damning testimony came from the state's forensic digital expert, who presented the Internet search history recovered from Tyler's laptop. Special Agent David Park of the Connecticut State Police Computer Crimes Unit explained how, despite Tyler's attempts to delete his browsing history, forensic software could recover data from the computer's hard drive that remained even after surface deletion. Park displayed a timeline of Tyler's searches on the courtroom's projection screen, walking the jury through the progression from general queries about family dynamics to specific searches about how to commit and conceal murder. The search history shows a clear evolution of thought, Agent Park testified. In December and January, we see searches about feeling unwanted in families, about parents who favor younger children, about sibling rivalry. By February, the searches become more specific and disturbing. Questions about methods of killing, about avoiding detection, about staged crime scenes. Then, on the afternoon of March the 17th, just hours before Carol Brennan's murder, we see searches directly related to evading police investigation. The prosecution displayed each search query chronologically. December 15, 2022. Why do parents love new babies more than older children? December 28, 2022. How to deal with feeling replaced in your family. January 10, 2023. Can you disown your child to make room for new child? January 24, 2023. How to stage a home invasion. February 3, 2023. Ligature strangulation. How long does it take? February 14, 2023. Do security cameras record inside houses? February 28, 2023. How to avoid leaving DNA evidence at crime scene. March 10, 2023. Can deleted computer history be recovered by police? March 17, 2023, 3:47 p.m. Where do police look first in murder investigation? March 17th, 2023, 4:22 p.m. Time of death determination methods. March 17th, 2023, 4:58 p.m. How long after death can an alibi be verified? This progression, presented to the jury in chronological order with timestamps, created a powerful narrative of premeditation impossible to dismiss. Martinez's cross-examination focused on the possibility that these searches represented morbid curiosity, or research for creative writing, rather than actual planning. But Agent Park countered that the specificity and timing of the searches, particularly those conducted hours before the murder, strongly suggested practical rather than theoretical interest. The gaming company's records provided independent corroboration of the timeline, with a representative testifying about Tyler's login and logout times, the gap during which Carol was killed, and the archived voice chat recordings that showed his demeanor before and after the crucial period. The jury heard brief excerpts of Tyler's voice during normal gameplay, laughing and strategizing with fellow players, contrasted with his notably subdued and distracted communications after logging back in following the murder. When Michael Brennan took the stand as a prosecution witness, the courtroom fell into profound silence. The father and husband who had lost his wife and unborn daughters, now testifying in the prosecution of his surviving son, embodied the case's unbearable tragedy in a way that transcended legal arguments. Michael's testimony focused on family dynamics, Tyler's increasing withdrawal in the months before Carol's death, and the timeline of March 17th evening. Prosecutor Walsh handled him gently, recognizing both his grief and his complex position. "Mr. Brennan, can you tell the jury about the evening of March 17th? Walsh asked. Michael, his voice carefully controlled, described a typical family evening, noting that Tyler had gone to his room after dinner, as had become his pattern. When asked if he had heard anything unusual from the basement, or seen Tyler anywhere other than his bedroom that evening, Michael stated that he had been focused on work in the living room and had not paid close attention to household comings and goings. The most emotionally difficult portion of Michael's testimony came when Walsh asked him to describe his relationship with Tyler before Carol's death. "Tyler was my son," Michael said, using past tense that clearly pained him. "He was bright, athletic, engaged, but starting about 2 years ago, he began pulling away. We tried to reach him, tried to understand what was happening, but he shut us out. Carol was particularly worried. She kept saying something was wrong, that we needed to do more to help him." When asked about the pregnancy and whether he had noticed Tyler's reaction to the news, Michael acknowledged that his son had seemed less enthusiastic than his younger children, but that he had attributed this to normal teenage self-absorption rather than seeing it as a warning sign. "I thought he was just being a teenager," Michael testified, his voice breaking. I never thought he was capable of—" He could not finish the statement. Martinez's cross-examination of Michael was respectful, but aimed at establishing that the parents had been aware Tyler was struggling, but had not taken adequate steps to address his mental health crisis. "Mr. Brennan, you mentioned that Carol was worried about Tyler. Did she recommend seeing a therapist or psychiatrist?" Martinez asked. Michael confirmed that Carol had suggested counseling, but that they had hesitated, hoping Tyler's mood would improve on its own, a decision he now clearly regretted. The defense's case centered entirely on recontextualizing Tyler's actions through the lens of neuroscience, psychology, and adolescent development, rather than disputing the physical facts of the crime. Their first expert witness, Dr. Sarah Richardson, a developmental neuroscientist from Yale University, provided the jury with an intensive education on adolescent brain development, using three-dimensional brain models and imaging studies to explain the structural and functional differences between teenage and adult brains. The prefrontal cortex, which sits behind the forehead, is essentially the brain's executive control center, Dr. Richardson explained, pointing to a brain model. It's responsible for impulse control, risk assessment, planning, and understanding long-term consequences. Neuroimaging studies consistently show that this region is not fully developed until the mid-20s, meaning that teenagers, even 16-year-olds who may seem physically mature, are operating with fundamentally different cognitive equipment than adults. Dr. Richardson specifically addressed how this developmental reality affected decision-making under stress. When adolescents experience strong emotions, whether anger, fear, or anxiety, the underdeveloped prefrontal cortex struggles to regulate those emotions and impose rational control. The result is that teenagers are far more likely than adults to act impulsively, to fail to fully consider consequences, and to make decisions they would not make if given time for rational reflection. On cross-examination, Prosecutor Walsh challenged Dr. Richardson's testimony by asking whether the expert's description of normal adolescent brain development could account for the months of Internet searches and the calculated staging of the crime scene. Dr. Richardson, you've described normal teenage impulsivity, but the evidence shows Tyler searched for information about committing and concealing murder over a period of months. Doesn't that suggest planning capacity beyond normal adolescent impulsivity? Dr. Richardson acknowledged that the search history suggested planning but maintained that adolescent planning was qualitatively different from adult planning. Teenagers can engage in forward-thinking behavior, she explained, but they do so with incomplete understanding of outcomes and with a compromised ability to fully integrate the reality of consequences. It's similar to how a teenager might plan to sneak out of the house but not fully grasp the potential dangers involved. The defense's psychiatric expert, Dr. Marcus Chen, whose evaluation had been submitted to the court earlier, testified extensively about Tyler's mental state in the months leading up to the murder. Dr. Chen explained his diagnosis of major depressive disorder, social anxiety disorder, and pathological attachment disruption, describing how these conditions had created a perfect storm of psychological vulnerability. Tyler experienced his mother's pregnancy and the family's excitement about the twins as existential rejection, Dr. Chen testified. In his compromised psychological state, he interpreted normal parental behavior through a distorted lens, where preparation for new babies equaled abandonment of existing children. The psychiatrist walked the jury through Tyler's journal entries and the text message exchanges with Carol, highlighting evidence of his deteriorating mental state and distorted thinking. He emphasized that Carol's final text message to Tyler, assuring him that he was irreplaceable and that her love for him would never change, had actually been sent less than 24 hours before he killed her. suggesting that he had been unable to process or believe her reassurance, even when it was explicitly offered. Individuals experiencing the kind of attachment disruption Tyler was suffering often cannot accept reassurance because their distorted belief system filters out information that contradicts their negative self-perception, Dr. Chen explained. It's a tragic irony that Carol was trying to reach her son, trying to help him understand he wasn't being replaced, but his mental illness prevented him from receiving that message. The prosecution's cross-examination of Dr. Chen focused on the distinction between mental illness as an explanation for behavior versus mental illness as a legal excuse for criminal conduct. Walsh carefully questioned the psychiatrist about Tyler's capacity to understand right from wrong, his ability to plan and execute complex actions, and his evident awareness that what he was doing would have legal consequences, as demonstrated by his attempts to conceal the crime. Dr. Chen, despite Tyler's depression and attachment issues, did he understand that killing his mother was morally wrong? Walsh asked. Dr. Chen acknowledged that Tyler possessed intellectual understanding that murder was wrong. And did Tyler demonstrate the cognitive ability to research methods of killing, to plan his actions, to stage a crime scene, and to lie to police about his involvement? Walsh continued. Again, Dr. Chen confirmed that Tyler had demonstrated these capacities, while maintaining that his mental illness and developmental stage still significantly impaired his judgment and impulse control. The testimony of Emma and Lucas Brennan, the younger siblings, was carefully managed given their ages and trauma. Both children appeared via recorded video depositions rather than in-person courtroom testimony, a decision made to protect their well-being while still allowing the jury to hear their observations. Emma described Tyler's increasing isolation and his comments about being replaced by the twins, providing context for his state of mind. Lucas, only 8 years old at the time of his mother's death, primarily confirmed the family's evening routine and his limited interaction with Tyler in the months before the murder. Perhaps the most anticipated moment of the trial came when the defense called Tyler Brennan himself to testify. Martinez had debated extensively whether to put his client on the stand, knowing that Tyler's flat affect and limited emotional expressiveness could work against him with the jury, but ultimately deciding that the jury needed to hear directly from Tyler about his state of mind. Tyler took the stand wearing a dress shirt and khakis, looking younger than his 16 years, his hands visibly trembling as he was sworn in. Under Martinez's careful questioning, Tyler described his psychological state in the months before the murder, explaining how he had felt increasingly invisible in his family as preparations for the twins-dominated household conversations. "It felt like I was already gone," Tyler testified, his voice barely above a whisper. Every conversation was about hope and grace, about what they would need, where they would sleep. When I tried to talk about school or soccer or anything in my life, it was like no one heard me. Tyler described his interpretation of the boarding school discussions, explaining that he had overheard his parents talking about making room and needing space, and had concluded they were planning to send him away to accommodate the twins. When Martinez asked whether he had considered simply asking his parents directly about their intentions, Tyler's response revealed the depth of his cognitive distortion. I knew what they would say. They would make up some excuse, tell me I was being dramatic. I could see what was really happening. The most difficult portion of Tyler's testimony came when Martinez asked him to describe the evening of March the 17th. Tyler's account, delivered in the same flat tone that had characterized much of his presentation, detailed following his mother to the basement after hearing her go downstairs. I wasn't planning to hurt her, Tyler stated. I took the extension cord because I wanted to. I don't know. I wanted her to be scared, to understand how I felt. But when I got down there and saw her going through those baby clothes, so happy, not even thinking about me, something in me just broke. Tyler's description of the strangulation itself was clinical and detached, lacking the emotional horror one would expect from someone recounting killing their mother. I put the cord around her neck and pulled it tight. She didn't make much sound. It was faster than I thought it would be. Then she wasn't moving anymore, and I realized what I had done, but it was too late to fix it. When asked about the staging of the crime scene, Tyler acknowledged attempting to make it look like a break-in, explaining that he had panicked and thought if it appeared an intruder had killed his mother, he wouldn't be suspected. The prosecution's cross-examination of Tyler was measured but devastating. Walsh focused on the premeditation demonstrated by his internet searches, the deliberate retrieval of the extension cord from the garage before going to the basement, and the calculated nature of his subsequent actions. Tyler, you testified that you weren't planning to hurt your mother, but you had searched the internet for information about ligature strangulation before that night, hadn't you? Walsh asked. Tyler confirmed that he had made such searches, but claimed they were just morbid curiosity. Walsh then systematically walked Tyler through his searches from March the 17th itself. Queries about police investigation techniques and time of death determination conducted just hours before the murder. Were these searches also just morbid curiosity? Walsh asked. Tyler struggled to provide an explanation, ultimately stating, I don't know why I searched for those things. The prosecutor's implication was clear without being stated. Tyler had been preparing to commit the crime and avoid detection, demonstrating premeditation incompatible with his claim of impulsive action. The most powerful moment of Walsh's cross-examination came when she asked Tyler about his mother's final text message, the one assuring him he was irreplaceable and would always be loved. Tyler, your mother sent you that message on March 16th, less than 24 hours before you killed her. She was telling you directly that her love for you would never change, that you weren't being replaced. Did you read that message? Tyler confirmed he had read it, and yet the next day you took an extension cord from the garage, followed your mother to the basement, and strangled her to death. Is that correct? Tyler's barely audible yes hung in the courtroom air as Walsh returned to her seat, her point made without additional commentary. The closing arguments in State of Connecticut versus Tyler Brennan took place on November 14th, 2023, bringing to a close 6 weeks of testimony that had explored the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, family dynamics, and criminal responsibility. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh approached the jury with the gravity appropriate to asking them to convict a teenager of first-degree murder, while also acknowledging the genuine tragedy that had befallen all involved. Members of the jury, you have heard extensive testimony about adolescent brain development, about mental illness, about family dynamics. Walsh began. These are important considerations, and I don't dispute the science you've heard about how teenage brains work differently than adult brains. But I ask you to consider what the law requires for criminal responsibility, and what the evidence in this case has shown about Tyler Brennan's actions. Walsh projected a timeline on the courtroom screen showing Tyler's internet searches alongside key family events, the pregnancy announcement, the gender reveal showing twins, the purchase of baby furniture, and finally the murder itself. This is not impulsivity, Walsh argued, gesturing to the timeline. This is months of escalating resentment, coupled with active research about how to commit and conceal murder. Tyler Brennan had numerous opportunities to talk to his parents, to express his feelings, to ask for help. Instead, he chose violence. The prosecutor then addressed the staging of the crime scene and Tyler's behavior afterward. After killing his mother, Tyler Brennan did not call for help, did not experience immediate remorse, did not confess in a panic. He calmly cleaned up, staged a break-in, hid the murder weapon in his closet, and went back to his video games. For hours, while his mother and unborn sisters lay dead in the basement, he chatted with online friends, acted normally, and maintained his deception. This is not the behavior of someone whose underdeveloped brain failed to control an impulse. This is calculated, conscious criminal behavior. Walsh concluded by reminding the jury of the victims. Carol Brennan dedicated her life to healing children, to helping families, to making the world better. She loved her son unconditionally, and she died never knowing why he hated her enough to kill her. Hope and Grace Brennan never drew a breath, never got the chance at life their mother fought so hard to give them. They deserve justice. The law provides that justice through your verdict. We ask you to find Tyler Brennan guilty of first-degree murder. Defense attorney Robert Martinez faced the difficult task of asking the jury for mercy without appearing to minimize the tragedy or excuse Tyler's actions. He began by acknowledging the loss. Nothing I say can bring back Carol Brennan or her unborn daughters. Nothing can heal the wound this family has suffered. But what you must decide is not whether what happened was terrible, it obviously was, but whether Tyler Brennan, a 16-year-old experiencing severe mental illness and operating with a physiologically immature brain, possessed the kind of mature, calculated intent that the law requires for first-degree murder. Martinez reminded the jury of Dr. Richardson's testimony about the prefrontal cortex and adolescent decision-making. The science is clear and uncontested. Teenage brains are different. They process risk differently. They respond to emotion differently. They understand consequences differently. This isn't opinion or theory, it's established neuroscience that the Supreme Court itself has recognized in limiting juvenile sentencing. The defense attorney then reframed the internet searches and planning as consistent with obsessive thinking rather than careful premeditation. Tyler was a troubled teenager, spiraling into deeper and deeper distorted thinking about his family situation. His internet searches show someone who was catastrophizing, who was researching worst-case scenarios, but they don't show mature adult planning. They show a confused, mentally ill adolescent trying to make sense of feelings he didn't understand and didn't have the cognitive or emotional tools to manage. Martinez concluded with a direct appeal to the jury's understanding of human complexity. Tyler Brennan is guilty of causing his mother's death. That's not in dispute. But first-degree murder requires proof of premeditation and mature understanding of one's actions. The evidence, properly understood through the lens of adolescent development and mental illness, shows something different. A tragic failure of impulse control by a child whose brain could not handle the psychological crisis he was experiencing. We ask you to return a verdict that recognizes this reality. The jury began deliberations on the afternoon of November 14, 2023. Unlike some high-profile cases where deliberations stretch for days or weeks, the Tyler Brennan jury reached a verdict in approximately 8 hours, deliberating through the late afternoon, evening, and into the night before, buzzing the bailiff at 11:47 p.m. to announce they had reached a decision. Judge Morrison made the unusual decision to reconvene court that evening rather than waiting until morning, reasoning that the jury and all parties deserved closure without an overnight wait. The courtroom, hastily reassembled near midnight, carried a surreal quality as gallery members, media representatives, and family members filed in, many having been contacted at home and rushing back to court. Tyler Brennan was brought from the courthouse holding cell where he had been waiting, his expression showing the first real fear observers had seen since his arrest. Michael Brennan, seated in the front row, appeared aged a decade beyond the months since his wife's death, his face gray with anticipation of hearing judgment pronounced on his son. Judge Morrison called the court to order and asked the jury foreman, a retired schoolteacher, if they had reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied, handing a sealed envelope to the bailiff. The judge reviewed the verdict form silently before returning it to the clerk for reading. In the matter of State of Connecticut versus Tyler Brennan, on the charge of murder in the first degree of Carol Brennan, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty as charged. The courtroom remained silent as the verdict was read, the late hour and emotional exhaustion of all involved creating an atmosphere of numb acceptance rather than dramatic reaction. Tyler's hands gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles white, but his expression remained largely blank. Michael Brennan closed his eyes, his head dropping forward in a gesture that could have signified relief, devastation, or simply surrender to the inevitable. On the charge of murder in the first degree of unborn children Hope and Grace Brennan, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty as charged. Judge Morrison polled the jury individually, confirming that the verdict was unanimous, and set sentencing for December 15, 2023. As Tyler was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, he glanced briefly toward his father, but Michael's eyes remained closed, unable or unwilling to meet his son's gaze. The missed connection, captured by court sketch artists, would later be described in media accounts as emblematic of the complete fracture of what remained of the Brennan family. The sentencing hearing, held 1 month after the verdict, drew even larger crowds than the trial itself, with the courtroom gallery filled to capacity and overflow crowds gathering in the courthouse corridors. The proceeding began with victim impact statements, the most wrenching being Michael Brennan's direct address to his son. Michael approached the podium slowly, his prepared statement trembling in his hands. "Tyler, I don't know if you can hear me through whatever walls you've built around yourself, Michael began, his voice raw with emotion. I don't know if any part of the son I raised still exists inside you. But I need you to know what you've taken from this world. Your mother was the most loving, dedicated person I've ever known. She spent her career healing children, and she loved you with a ferocity that never wavered, even when you pulled away from us. She died trying to prepare baby clothes for your sisters, excited about expanding our family, never imagining that you could hate her enough to kill her. Michael paused, struggling to maintain composure. Hope and Grace never got a chance. They never drew breath, never saw sunlight, never felt love except through your mother's body. You took that from them. You took everything from them. And you've taken my family, my future, my ability to ever feel safe or whole again. I wake up every day in a house that feels haunted, trying to help Emma and Lucas understand why their brother killed their mother, trying to find meaning in something that has no meaning. The father's final words to his son were delivered through tears. I will never forgive you for what you've done, but I also can't stop being your father, can't stop remembering the little boy who used to fall asleep on my lap, who I taught to ride a bike, who I loved completely. Those two realities exist together in me, tearing me apart. You've destroyed your own life along with everyone else's. I hope someday you understand the magnitude of what you've done, though I'm not sure that understanding would be a blessing or a curse. Additional impact statements came from Carol's sister, colleagues, from the hospital, and even some of Tyler's former teachers, all attempting to convey the ripple effects of the murders. A representative from Carol's hospital read a statement describing the neonatal intensive care unit's dedication of a family waiting room in Carol's honor, a space where families of critically ill infants could find comfort and support, continuing Carol's legacy of compassionate care. Defense attorney Robert Martinez, presenting the case for a sentence less than life without parole, called several witnesses to testify about Tyler's behavior since his incarceration and his potential for rehabilitation. A juvenile detention facility counselor testified that Tyler had been compliant, had engaged with educational programming, and had begun participating in therapy sessions after months of resistance. The counselor acknowledged that Tyler's emotional responses remained limited, but suggested this represented trauma and dissociation rather than fundamental incapacity for empathy. Dr. Chen, the forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Tyler, returned to testify about long-term treatment prospects. Tyler Brennan is 16 years old, Dr. Chen reminded the court. His brain will continue developing for another decade, with intensive psychiatric treatment, trauma therapy, and appropriate intervention. There is potential for significant psychological evolution. While nothing can undo what he's done, there is a possibility that future Tyler Brennan could develop genuine understanding and remorse that current Tyler Brennan cannot access. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh countered with a forceful argument for the maximum sentence. Your Honor, the defense asks this court to base sentencing on potential for future rehabilitation, on who Tyler Brennan might become decades from now. But we must sentence based on what he did and who he was when he committed these murders. This was not an impulsive act. It was not a momentary loss of control. It was planned, executed, and concealed with calculated precision. 3 lives were ended, Carol Brennan and her unborn daughters. The magnitude of that loss demands the most serious consequence our law allows. Before imposing sentence, Judge Ellen Morrison addressed Tyler directly, asking if he wished to make a statement. Tyler rose slowly, approaching the microphone with visible reluctance. His statement, when it came, was brief and delivered in the same flat tone that had characterized most of his court appearances. "I know what I did was wrong," Tyler said, reading from handwritten notes. "I know I can't fix it or take it back. The counselors want me to say I feel remorse, but I don't really know what that's supposed to feel like. I think about my mom sometimes, about what happened, but it feels like it happened to someone else, like I'm watching a movie about a different person's life. I understand that I need to be punished. I understand that everyone hates me, including my dad, including myself. I don't know what else to say." This statement, notable for its emotional emptiness and self-focus even in a moment supposedly dedicated to expressing remorse, would later be cited by legal analysts as potentially damaging to any future appeal efforts. Judge Morrison's expression as she listened revealed nothing of her thoughts, but her subsequent sentencing remarks suggested Tyler's words had done little to generate sympathy. "Tyler Brennan, please rise for sentencing," Judge Morrison instructed. Tyler stood flanked by his attorneys, his small frame seeming to shrink further as he faced the judge. Morrison's voice was firm, but not harsh as she began her remarks. "This court has carefully considered the verdict, the victim impact statements, the testimony regarding your age and mental state, and all factors relevant to imposing an appropriate sentence. You were convicted by a jury of your peers of first-degree murder of your mother, Carol Brennan, and your unborn sisters, Hope and Grace Brennan. These crimes were not committed in a moment of passion or impulsive rage. The evidence showed planning, research, execution, and attempted concealment that demonstrate understanding of your actions and their wrongfulness." Judge Morrison acknowledged the expert testimony about adolescent brain development and Tyler's mental illness, but distinguished between explanation and excuse. While your age and psychological state provide context for understanding how these tragic events occurred, they do not negate your criminal responsibility. The law recognizes that even adolescents can commit crimes of such gravity that adult consequences are warranted. This is such a case. The judge then pronounced sentence: Tyler Brennan, for the murder of Carol Brennan. This court sentences you to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. For the murders of Hope and Grace Brennan, this court sentences you to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years on each count. These sentences to run concurrently with the first. The sentence, while severe, was not the absolute maximum life without possibility of parole that the prosecution had sought. Judge Morrison explained her reasoning. Given your age at the time of the offense and the Supreme Court's guidance regarding juvenile sentencing, this court finds that a sentence with the possibility of eventual parole, albeit decades in the future, is most appropriate. You will be 60 years old before you are eligible for parole consideration. At that time, a parole board will assess whether you have developed the understanding, remorse, and fundamental character change that would justify release. But make no mistake, the next 40 years of your life will be spent in prison as consequence for the deliberate taking of 3 innocent lives. As Tyler was led from the courtroom for the final time, Michael Brennan remained seated, staring straight ahead, processing that his son would spend the rest of his childhood, all of his young adulthood, and much of his middle age in prison. The newspaper articles the next day would describe a courtroom where there were no winners, only varying degrees of loss. The aftermath of Tyler Brennan's conviction and sentencing rippled far beyond the immediate family and Connecticut legal system. The case became a focal point in national discussions about juvenile justice, with advocacy groups on both sides citing it to support their positions. Those favoring rehabilitation-focused approaches pointed to Tyler's age and mental illness, arguing that even 40 years was excessive for a 16-year-old whose brain was not fully developed. Those supporting tougher juvenile sentencing used the case's premeditation and calculated cover-up to argue that some crimes transcend age-based considerations. In Westfield, Connecticut, the community struggled to process the tragedy that had unfolded in their midst. The Brennan home, which Michael had immediately put on the market after sentencing, sat vacant for months before finally selling at a significant loss to buyers unaware of its history. Neighbors who had waved to the Brennans at weekend barbecues and chatted with Carol about her work at the hospital found themselves questioning whether they had missed warning signs, whether Tyler's isolation had been visible to those paying attention. St. Matthew's Catholic Church, where the Brennan family had been regular attendees, held a memorial service for Carol, Hope, and Grace 6 months after the sentencing. The service, attended by hundreds of community members, featured a homily by Father Thomas Murphy that grappled with questions of forgiveness, justice, and how faith communities should respond to unspeakable tragedy. "We are called to love and to forgive," Father Murphy preached. "But we are not called to excuse or minimize evil." Carol Brennan's death, and the deaths of her unborn daughters, represent a profound moral failure that we must acknowledge honestly, while still extending our compassion to all who suffer, including Tyler, who must live with the magnitude of what he has done. For Michael Brennan, life after the trial meant reconstructing an existence that bore no resemblance to what he had expected. Unable to remain in Connecticut, where every location held memories and where his face had become recognizable from media coverage, he relocated to Oregon, taking a position with a small environmental consulting firm that allowed him to work remotely. His relationships with Emma and Lucas, his surviving children, became the focus of his emotional energy. Both children were receiving intensive therapy to process their mother's murder and their brother's culpability, struggling with age-appropriate questions about family loyalty, safety, and trust. Michael's decision about whether to maintain contact with Tyler became one of the most difficult of his life. Initially, he refused all communication, unable to face the son who had killed his wife. But approximately 8 months after sentencing, prompted by his therapist's suggestion that complete severance might ultimately harm his own healing process, Michael began writing letters to Tyler in prison. The letters, which Tyler later described to prison counselors as formal and distant, contained no expressions of forgiveness but maintained a thread of connection, reporting on Emma and Lucas's lives and Michael's own adjustment to his new circumstances. Tyler's first years in the Connecticut prison system were marked by isolation and minimal progress in therapy. Transferred to an adult facility on his 18th birthday, he found himself one of the youngest inmates in a system populated primarily by men decades older. Prison officials created a special protective custody arrangement for Tyler, recognizing both his vulnerability and his high-profile status. His psychological evaluations during this period continued to note limited emotional range and difficulty accessing genuine remorse, though counselors debated whether this represented permanent personality features or defensive mechanisms against overwhelming guilt. By the time Tyler reached his early 20s, prison records showed the beginning of subtle changes. He had completed his GED and begun taking college courses through a prison education program. More significantly, he had started participating meaningfully in therapy, beginning to articulate understanding of his actions' impact that had been completely absent during trial. A prison therapist's report from Tyler's 22nd birthday noted, "Inmate Brennan is beginning to demonstrate capacity for perspective-taking and emotional understanding that was not present in earlier sessions. He has begun expressing what appears to be genuine horror at his past actions, though this recognition clearly causes him significant psychological distress. Whether this represents authentic moral development or learned therapeutic responses remains to be fully assessed over time." The legal aftermath of Tyler's conviction included an appeal filed by new attorneys working pro bono on his behalf, arguing that the trial court had erred in allowing him to be tried as an adult, and that his sentence violated evolving standards regarding juvenile punishment. The Connecticut Supreme Court heard oral arguments in 2025, 2 years after Tyler's sentencing, but ultimately affirmed both the conviction and sentence, finding that the trial court had properly exercised its discretion given the premeditated nature of the crime and the calculated cover-up efforts. The appellate court's decision, while disappointing to advocates who had hoped for sentencing relief, included a separate concurring opinion by one justice that acknowledged the case's moral complexity. "While I concur in upholding this conviction and sentence under current law, I write separately to note the profound difficulty presented by cases involving adolescent offenders who commit terrible crimes. Tyler Brennan's actions warrant serious consequences, but his age at the time of the offense and his potential for maturation over decades of incarceration present questions that our legal system continues to grapple with imperfectly." As Tyler's case faded from public attention, replaced by newer tragedies and controversies, the Brennan family's story left a lasting impact on discussions about parental awareness of adolescent mental health, the potential for violence in seemingly stable families, and the limitations of the criminal justice system in addressing juvenile crime. Yale New Haven Hospital established the Carol Brennan Memorial Fund, providing resources for families of NICU patients and funding research into prenatal care and high-risk pregnancy support, ensuring that Carol's professional dedication would continue benefiting children and families. Emma and Lucas Brennan, growing up in Oregon with their father, would eventually request cessation of contact with Tyler, a decision Michael supported while recognizing its painful finality. The younger Brennan children, both receiving ongoing therapy and support, faced the challenge of constructing identities separate from the tragedy that had defined their childhood. Michael's therapist later described this process as rebuilding selves from the fragments left after profound betrayal and loss. In 2030, 7 years after his conviction, Tyler Brennan would give his first interview to a journalist researching adolescent violence and family dynamics. The interview, conducted in the prison visiting room under strict supervision, revealed a Tyler markedly different from the emotionally flat teenager who had testified at trial. Now, in his mid-20s, with years of therapy and education behind him, he attempted to articulate understanding that had eluded him at 16. "I understand now what I couldn't see then," Tyler told the journalist. "My mother loved me completely. She wasn't replacing me or sending me away. My brain constructed a story that wasn't true, and I acted on that false story with irreversible consequences. I took 3 lives, my mother's and my sister's, and destroyed my entire family, including myself. No amount of therapy or education or time will ever make that okay. The best I can do is spend the rest of my life, whether in prison or eventually outside it, trying to honor their memory by becoming someone capable of genuine empathy and contribution. Even though nothing I do will balance the scales of what I took." This interview, published in a criminal justice journal in 2031, sparked renewed debate about whether Tyler's evolution demonstrated the wisdom of sentences allowing eventual parole consideration for juvenile offenders, or whether his obvious development merely highlighted the tragedy of lives destroyed before full maturity. The article's comment section became a battleground between those who saw Tyler as a case study in rehabilitation potential, and those who believed his intellectual understanding of his crime could never constitute adequate justice for his victims. Michael Brennan did not comment on his son's interview, maintaining the public silence he had adopted after sentencing. Friends reported that he lived quietly, focused on his work and his relationship with Emma and Lucas, carrying his grief privately. He never remarried, telling close friends that the trauma of Carol's death and the circumstances surrounding it had fundamentally altered his capacity for intimate trust. The question of whether Tyler Brennan would ever actually be released from prison remained, as of 2033 when this account was compiled, decades away from resolution. His first parole eligibility would come in 2063, when he would be 60 years old, having spent 40 years incarcerated. Whether the parole board at that future date would find sufficient evidence of rehabilitation and transformation to justify release would depend on factors impossible to predict. Tyler's continued development over decades, evolving societal attitudes toward juvenile offenders, and the weight given to the premeditated nature of his original crime versus his potential for redemption. What remained certain was that no outcome could restore what was lost. Carol Brennan would never see her children grow up, would never meet her granddaughter. Emma's daughter, born in 2032, and named Carol in her grandmother's honor, would never continue her work healing sick children and supporting frightened families. Hope and Grace Brennan would never live, never become the individuals they might have been, their potential forever unrealized. Emma and Lucas would carry the trauma of their mother's murder and their brother's culpability throughout their lives, influencing their relationships, their sense of safety in the world, and their understanding of family bonds. The case of State of Connecticut versus Tyler Brennan thus exists not as a story with clear moral lessons or satisfying resolution, but as a testament to the devastating complexity of family violence, the profound challenges of juvenile justice, and the limits of any legal system to provide true closure when the most intimate relationships are shattered by unthinkable violence. The courtroom where Judge Morrison pronounced sentence is now used for routine civil matters. The basement where Carol Brennan died has been renovated by its new owners. But the ripples of that March evening in 2023 continue to spread, touching lives and raising questions that resist easy answers about responsibility, punishment, redemption, and the possibility of forgiveness in the face of the unforgivable.